Brianna Petco had 6 weeks to rebuild an entire historic district before Christmas. To make matters worse, the mayor had just brought in a billionaire developer from Atlanta to help finish the job. The problem was, Grant Calloway didn't believe in restoring the town at all. And if the project wasn't ready to unveil at Petersburg's famous Christmas Eve market, the small city would lose the one opportunity that could save its future. What Brianna didn't expect was that somewhere between blueprints, construction deadlines, and late nights beneath glowing Christmas lights, she would start falling for the one man who nearly tore her entire plan apart. And that was only the beginning. Because when Brianna first arrived in Petersburg, she thought saving the city would be the hardest thing she'd ever have to do. She had no idea the real challenge would be protecting her heart. Welcome to Christmas in Old Town Love Stories, where ambitious women, unexpected love, and the holiday spirit collides. If you believe in soft love, second chances, and Christmas miracles, like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe. We'd appreciate your support. All of these stories are a part of the world for our upcoming film, Christmas in Old Town. Now, let's get into the story. Brianna Petco, 30 years old, Petersburg, Virginia's stylish new city planner, stood in the mayor's office, hands pressed against the blueprints on her laptop. Her red curls framed a determined, sharp face, and her eyes sparkled with excitement and nerves. She had worked hard on these designs, and like most of her work, she had done it alone. "The vision is perfect, Brianna," the mayor said, scanning her plans. "But there's one catch: you must have it ready by Christmas Day." "I want to announce it at the Christmas Eve market." Brianna's pulse skipped. Nearly impossible. And yet her mind raced with ideas. This project, her project, was about to redefine the heart of Petersburg. The mayor didn't have this insane deadline for nothing. If the work development is unveiled by Christmas, Petersburg would qualify for a major historic revitalization grant that could save the downtown from decline. The grant required a completed model project, proving the city can blend modernization with historic preservation. By late November, the historic buildings along Market Street were already glowing beneath strands of Christmas lights. Shop windows sparkled with wreaths and garlands, and the scent of cinnamon drifted from the small bakery on the corner. It was the kind of small city that people imagined when they thought about the holidays. Quiet, charming, timeless, which was exactly why Brianna Petco had been hired. 3 months earlier, she had accepted the position as Petersburg's new city planner, determined to help the small historic town find a future without losing its past. Although she was always that girl, a baddie with her fashion-forward fits and thriving social media, when it came to architecture, her heart belonged to the past. That morning, she stood at the front of the planning office conference room, trying to hide the nervous flutter in her chest as members of the town council studied the presentation glowing behind her. The slide displayed her vision for the aging downtown block, restored brick storefronts, warm cafe lights, balconies with apartments above small businesses, a work-and-live district, the first one Petersburg had ever attempted. Brianna took a steady breath and gestured toward the screen. "This district could completely change the future of our town." At the time, she had no idea how much it was about to change her own. After the mayor gives the impossible deadline, the mayor folded her hands on the conference table and smiled. "We'll need the project finished by Christmas." The room fell silent. Brianna blinked. "Finished." "Completely open," the mayor confirmed. "Businesses ready to move in." Brianna's mind raced through construction schedules, permits, restoration timelines. Christmas was only weeks away. The mayor seemed to read the worry on her face. "Don't worry," she said. "You won't be doing it alone." Brianna frowned slightly. The mayor gathered her papers. "A development partner will be joining the project tomorrow morning." "Who?" The mayor smiled. "Grant Calloway." Brianna had never heard the name before, but judging by the way the entire room suddenly went quiet, she had a feeling she was about to. "But Mayor," she protested, "I usually work on these types of projects solo." Mayor retorted, "But you usually don't have this insane deadline." Brianna conceded because, per usual, the mayor had never lied. The next morning, Brianna arrived at the planning office earlier than usual. She had barely slept the night before. The mayor's deadline still echoed in her head like a ticking clock. 6 weeks. 6 weeks to restore an entire block of historic buildings and have them ready to unveil at the Christmas Eve market. Even with a full construction team, it would be ambitious, with winter weather and holiday schedules. Nearly impossible. Brianna was the type to do everything on her own. As the oldest out of 5 children, who helped her parents raise them while they worked, was accustomed to taking charge. She set her coffee on the conference table, turned to the large touchscreen monitor behind her, and opened a design program with her plans for the work and live district. Carefully drawn sketches of building configurations animated on the screen, every balcony, storefront, and window restoration mapped out. She had poured months of thought into these designs. Petersburg deserved something that honored its history, not something that erased it. Outside the glass wall of the planning office, the City Hall hallway was already buzzing. Maeve, the mayor's famously organized assistant, strode past the doorway carrying her laptop. Even from across the hall, Brianna could hear her reminding someone about the mayor's schedule. The press call is at 10, the market committee meeting is at 11, and please make sure Janice has the updated event timeline. The head of the city's communications team had been talking nonstop about the Christmas Eve market for weeks. Apparently, the event was already attracting attention from across the state, which made the mayor's deadline feel even more impossible. Brianna shook the thought away and turned back to the blueprints on the monitor. The door to the planning office opened behind her. She didn't look up right away. "You must be the development partner," she said, still studying the building configurations. "I'd love if we could go over the restoration timeline before the mayor arrives." Footsteps crossed the room. Slow, confident, Brianna lifted her head. And for a brief second, she forgot what she was about to say. The man standing across the table was taller than she expected, easily over 6'3". Broad-shouldered, dressed in a barn jacket that looked far too expensive for a barn. His hair was sunlit blonde, slightly messy from the cold outside, but it was a good messy. Clear green eyes moved over the plans on the monitor before finally lifting to meet hers. Grant Calloway. Brianna blinked. This was the billionaire developer the mayor had brought in. At 36 years old, he looked younger than she imagined, less like a corporate executive and more like someone who belonged outdoors somewhere. Grant glanced at the monitor again, then back at her. He raised his dark eyebrows. "So these are your plans." His voice was calm, measured. Brianna straightened slightly. She gestured toward the renderings behind her. "The idea is to restore the buildings instead of replacing them. Shops on the ground floor, apartments above. A work and live district that keeps the historic character of the town intact." Grant studied the layout quietly for a moment. Too quietly. Brianna crossed her arms, suddenly aware of the way his attention moved across every detail she had carefully designed. Finally, he spoke. "This restoration alone could take 6 months. Brianna lifted her chin. "Not if we prioritize the structural work first." Shook his head slightly. "If the goal is speed, the smarter move would be to replace the buildings entirely." The words landed like a stone in the room. From the hallway, Brianna heard Maeve's voice again, brisk and efficient. "The mayor will be in the conference room in 5 minutes." 5 minutes. Brianna looked back at Grant. "Replace them with what?" she asked. Grant gestured toward the renderings. "Modern construction. Clean lines. Efficient builds. You'd have the project finished before Christmas without the risk of restoration delays." Brianna's pulse quickened. Outside the window, snow drifted slowly across Market Street, settling over the historic rooftops she had spent weeks studying, the very rooftops he was suggesting tearing down. She looked back at him. "If we replace them," she said carefully, "we lose the very thing that makes people want to come here." Didn't answer right away. Instead, those steady green eyes studied her with quiet curiosity. And suddenly Brianna had the strange feeling that this conversation was only the beginning. Later that night, the quiet fields outside neighboring Prince George, Virginia stretched beneath a sky full of winter stars. Grant Calloway stepped out of his truck and closed the door behind him. The ranch had always been his escape. A place far removed from construction meetings and investor calls. The barn lights glowed softly against the dark fields as a cold breeze rustled through the trees. Inside the stable, one of the horses lifted its head as Grant walked past. "Hey there," he murmured absently, but his thoughts were still back in the conference room. Back to the moment Brianna Petco had looked across the table and said, "They can't find Petersburg anywhere else." Grant stepped into the old barn and rested his hand against one of the wooden beams. The structure had been standing for nearly 100 years. When he first bought the property, contractors had recommended tearing it down and building a new one. It would have been easier, faster, more efficient. Instead, he had restored it, piece by piece. Grant glanced around the barn now, the original wood, the preserved craftsmanship, the quiet character of a place that had been given a second life. Suddenly, a slow, unexpected smile. Maybe Brianna Petco wasn't wrong after all. Grant looked out across the snowy fields. For the first time since the meeting, he opened an email containing Brianna's plans. Carefully, thoughtfully. And this time, he studied them a little differently. Morning light streamed through the tall windows of City Hall, casting long golden lines across the polished conference table. Brianna Petco paused outside the door for a moment, steadying herself. Last night she had replayed the meeting in her head at least a dozen times. Grant Calloway had dismantled half her proposal in under 5 minutes, and today he was supposed to deliver his official construction recommendation. She pushed the door open. Grant was already there. He stood near the large table, swiping past different building configurations on the screen, sleeves rolled to his forearms as he studied the drawings closely. For a moment, Brianna simply watched him. He looked different outside the formal setting of yesterday's meeting. Less distant, more focused. Maeve sat near the end of the table, typing feverishly on her laptop. "Good morning, Brianna," she said cheerfully without looking up. "Morning." Lifted his head then. His eyes landed on Brianna and stayed there just a moment longer than necessary. She had pulled her bright red curls into a loose ponytail this morning, with several spirals escaping around her face. The deep green sweater she wore made the copper tones in her hair even brighter. Grant had noticed that yesterday. He noticed it again now. Green eyes lingered for half a second. Then he cleared his throat and glanced back down at the plans. Across the room, the mayor had walked in just in time to catch the exchange. Her gaze moved from Grant to Brianna, and then back again. Interesting, very interesting, she thought to herself. The mayor took her seat slowly, folding her hands. "Well," she said pleasantly, "Mr. Calloway, I believe we're all eager to hear your recommendation." Grant rested both hands on the table. For a moment, Brianna braced herself, then he looked up. "We'll restore them." The room blinked. Maeve stopped mid-type. Brianna stared at him. Grant nodded toward the blueprints. "Every building on Market Street," he said calmly. "Exactly as the city planner designed." Silence filled the room. Even Maeve looked confused. "But yesterday you said," Brianna started. "I said replacement would be faster," Grant replied. His gaze met hers again. "But faster isn't always better." The mayor leaned back in her chair with a faint smile. She said slowly, "That's very true." Brianna studied him carefully. "Something changed your mind." Grant hesitated. For a brief moment, the memory of the old barn at his ranch flashed through his mind. The worn wooden beams, the history in the walls. Then he met her eyes again. "You made a good argument," he said simply. The mayor watched the two of them with unmistakable amusement. Maeve, meanwhile, was already typing restoration project Christmas deadline in bold letters across a note. "Well then," the mayor said, standing, "bring Market Street back to life." By mid-morning, the clouds had cleared and a pale winter sun stretched across Market Street. Brianna stood on the sidewalk, studying the row of aging brick buildings that would soon become the city's most ambitious restoration project. The structures leaned slightly with age, their balconies weathered but still elegant. To most people, they probably looked tired. To Brianna, they looked full of possibility. Behind her, a truck door shut. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Grant Calloway stepped up beside her, hands tucked into the pockets of his wool coat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They both looked up at the same building. Grant tilted his head slightly. "The balconies will need reinforcement." Brianna smiled faintly. "They're salvageable," he glanced at her. "You probably say that about everything." "That's because most things are salvageable." Grant huffed a quiet laugh. "You're optimistic for a city planner. You're pessimistic for someone who just agreed to restore an entire block of historic buildings." Looked back up at the brick facade. "Pessimistic," he said. "Practical." Brianna stepped closer to the building, running her hand lightly across the weathered brick. "These were built in 1894, she said. "Back when this street was the center of everything." Grant watched her as she spoke. The way she looked at the buildings wasn't just professional, it was personal, like she could see the past still living inside them. A curl of bright red hair slipped loose from the ponytail at the back of her head, catching the sunlight. Grant's gaze followed it for a moment before he forced himself to look back at the structure. Dangerous distraction. "So," he said briskly, "walk me through your plan." Brianna stepped backward onto the sidewalk. "Retail here," she said, pointing to the corner building. "A bakery would be perfect." Nodded. "Smart." She blinked. "You agree? Don't sound so surprised." "I'm adjusting." They continued down the sidewalk together, boots tapping against old brick. The street was quiet this early in the day, the cold air sharp and clean. At the next building, Brianna reached up toward one of the balconies. Grant instinctively stepped closer. "Careful," he said. "Fine." Her fingers brushed the iron railing just as a small piece of loose wood shifted above her. Before she could react, Grant's hand closed around her arm and gently pulled her back. The movement brought them suddenly, unexpectedly close. Closer than either of them had been before. For a brief second, Brianna felt the warmth of his hand through her coat sleeve. She looked up. Grant was already looking down at her. Green eyes, steady, focused. The moment stretched just a little longer than necessary. Then he released her arm and stepped back. "Like I said," he murmured. "Reinforcement." Brianna cleared her throat. "Right." Behind them, someone called out across the street. "Brianna," they both turned. Janice hurried toward them, bundled in a bright scarf and carrying her ever-present tablet. "I thought I'd find you two here," she said breathlessly. Grant raised an eyebrow. "You're everywhere." "Occupational requirement," Janice replied. "If this project is happening, our social media coordinator need photos of the before." She snapped a quick picture of the buildings. Then she glanced between Brianna and Grant. "Perfect," she said. The builder and the city planner standing together. Grant gave Brianna a sideways look. "We're already a headline." Janice grinned mischievously. "Oh, you have no idea." She typed quickly on her tablet. "Historic Market Street restoration begins." Then she looked up again. "Actually," she added thoughtfully, "maybe I'll save the announcement for when construction officially starts." Grant crossed his arms. "And when is that?" Janice smiled. "As soon as you two stop arguing long enough to begin." She walked away before either of them could respond. Grant shook his head slightly. Brianna laughed. The sound surprised him. Warm, easy. And for the first time since this project started, Grant Calloway realized something that caught him completely off guard. Restoring Market Street might not be the most complicated part of this job. Working with Brianna Petco, that was going to be the real challenge. And somehow, he was starting to look forward to it. "Hey, loves, there's some attraction in the air." Are you sensing real chemistry brewing between Brianna and Grant? Please write it in the comments and tell me where you're listening from. It warms our heart to know that the stories are reaching the whole world. Please like, subscribe, and comment. It only takes a second, and we'd really appreciate your help in growing this channel. Well, not just a channel, a community of people who still believe in love stories. Now back to the story. During the following week's Market Street was a whirlwind of hammers, sawdust, and the occasional confused call from a contractor trying to keep up with Brianna's exacting vision. Grant Calloway, normally the type to delegate every single task to a team of engineers and project managers, had spent the last 3 days shouldering beams, reviewing floor plans, and even measuring storefront windows himself. Brianna raised an eyebrow as he adjusted the angle of a reclaimed beam. "Not usually your style," she teased. Grant smirked, wiping sweat from his brow. "I usually sign the checks, not the beams, but someone has to make sure the vision survives reality." Brianna couldn't help but laugh. His eyes lingered on her just a second longer than necessary. Brianna felt it and ignored it. Barely. "Well, look at you, getting your hands dirty." "This is too important to outsource." "Dangerous, I know," he said. "I might start enjoying it." She laughed again, shaking her head, but her gaze drifted over him for just a moment too long. There was something undeniably swoon-worthy about a billionaire in a flannel shirt, even if it was of the expensive cashmere Ralph Lauren variety, and jeans with sleeves rolled up, clearly in his element, and clearly paying attention to her every word. "Speaking of dangerous," he added more softly now, "that pink dress you look." He paused like he was choosing the word carefully. "Really good today." Brianna blinked, caught off guard. She glanced down at her pink dress, then back at him, one brow lifting. "Just today." Grant's smile deepened, slower this time. "No," he said. "Today I just said it out loud." There was a pregnant pause and Brianna swallowed a smile. "Well," she said, recovering, "you clean up pretty well yourself, or down, I guess." Grant huffed a quiet laugh, brushing a hand along his jaw. I was actually thinking about shaving, trying to keep up with you, Miss Fashion. Brianna playfully cut her eyes. Let's get back to work. Grant didn't move right away. They were grinning ear to ear. Yeah, he said, watching her. Work. A week later, the mayor strolled past the construction, clipboard and blueprints in hand. She stopped, hands on her hips, and gave Grant a long, appraising look. Well, I'll be, she said, smirking. I've never seen a man this rich and this fine be this cooperative, and doing actual work. Grant glanced at her, eyebrows raised. Excuse me. The mayor waved a dismissive hand, grinning like she just revealed state secrets. Just saying, she said, leaning closer. I don't usually see hot billionaires actually lifting things with their own hands. Makes me think maybe it's because you like working with her. Brianna blinked, caught mid-laugh. Grant coughed, almost dropping a tape measure. Madame Mayor, Brianna said, laughter bubbling out despite herself. The mayor gave a wink and continued down the street, muttering to herself about romantic city planning and billionaires who liked a little attention. Grant shook his head at Brianna, but he could not hide his smile. You heard that, right? Brianna whispered, nudging him lightly. I heard it, he admitted before saying under his breath. And I'm not going to deny it. Brianna tilted her head and thought to herself, Mr. Calloway. Are you flirting with me? She wondered what he was thinking, but the slow curl of his lips, the way his gaze lingered just a moment too long, was all the explanation she needed. Her stomach betrayed her, it flipped, hot and sudden, and she had to look down at the plans to keep from showing it. Grant stepped closer, close enough that she could smell him, something expensive and intoxicating, leather and rose. His green-blue-gray eyes seemed to shift in the light, and his winter layers couldn't hide the lean muscles beneath. She forced herself to remind herself, this is work, professional. But the warmth, the heat, the spark refused to leave her. If you're free, he said, voice soft but teasing, want to ride with me to my ranch? There's something special I want to show you. Brianna's voice rang in her head. He has a ranch. Of course he does. She should have said no. It had been a long day, and she needed to get home to Pancake. But the thought of Pancake running free in the open fields and maybe seeing Grant in his element, it was tempting. Do you mind if I bring my dog? She asked, trying to sound casual. Grant grinned. So you like animals too? Please bring your fur baby. I can send a car for you. No, Brianna said. I'll drive. Just tell me where to go. See you at 7. We can have dinner too. I mean, we have to eat, he said, winking. Brianna smiled, suddenly aware of how fast her heart was racing. Sure, 7. Something comfy, he added. I know you're stylish, but the ranch can get a little messy. We haven't pushed the snow yet. That evening, she traded her sleek city wardrobe for a pair of jeans, a barn jacket, and stylish cowboy boots, more fashion-forward than practical, but they would do. Twilight spilled across the rolling fields of Grant Calloway's ranch in Prince George. Brianna parked near the long wooden fence and stepped out, drawing in a slow, deep breath of cold country air. Hay, pine, and open space mingled in a scent that made her chest lift. From the back of the SUV came a joyful thump. Oh, I know, she said, opening the rear door. A golden blur shot past her, ears flying, paws pounding the snow. Pancake, she called. The border collie tore across the field like a tiny rocket, rich copper-gold coat flashing in the fatting sunlight. Grant stepped out of the barn just in time to see it, stopping mid-stride, clearly impressed. What is that? Brianna laughed. That is Pancake. She's a golden border collie, he asked, eyebrow raised. Pancake skidded to a stop, then trotted straight toward him, sniffing his boots before wagging her tail like they'd been friends for years. Well, Grant said, crouching to scratch behind her ears, you seem confident. Brianna smiled faintly, shoving her hands in her coat pockets. She walks 5 miles a day. Apartment living isn't ideal for a dog that thinks she's responsible for managing livestock. Pancake froze at the pasture, herding instincts kicking in. 2 horses stood quietly behind the fence. Grant chuckled softly. Oh no. Before Brianna could react, Pancake began circling, crouched and focused, trying to organize the horses into some imaginary formation. Pancake, Brianna called, mortified. Grant laughed outright. She's working. She's not supposed to be working, Brianna exclaimed. Grant walked slowly toward the fence, gently pointing toward her. Your boss is over there. Pancake hesitated, then trotted back to Brianna, tail wagging proudly as if she'd completed a major assignment. Brianna shook her head, laughing. Don't encourage her, she'll try to move in. Took to the horses and asked her if she rode. Brianna admitted she did so in her dreams, but she grew up a city girl. As country as she got was the designer cowboy boots she was wearing. Grant promised to teach her how to ride once the project was finished. But that's not why I invited you today, he said. Grant stood and nodded toward the barn. Come on, I want to show you something. They walked side by side, Pancake bouncing happily between them. Twilight filtered through the barn slats, illuminating rows of original barn wood stacked neatly along the wall. Brianna's eyes widened. These are beautiful, she whispered. Original barn wood, Grant said, voice low. He stepped closer, eyes on her. Over 100 years old. I appreciated what you said at the start about preserving history. Your vision, it makes me want to do it right. Brianna felt a warm flutter in her chest. Thank you. His gaze lingered, slow and deliberate. He leaned just a fraction closer, so near she could see the subtle shift in his eyes and feel the warmth radiating off him. The world seemed to shrink, the golden light and hay-scented air cocooning them, her breath caught. She wanted to, but then a cheerful voice cut through the tension. Boss Calloway, dinner's ready. They both jumped slightly. Brianna laughed nervously. Grant straightened, his grin sheepish but amused. It was Mrs. Anderson, the ranch manager. To Brianna, she seemed every bit of 110, okay, maybe closer to 80 years old. But her energy was that of a 20-year-old. Whatever age she was, Mrs. Anderson was adorable. Her hair was a curly fluff of a white cloud. She wore a floral Henley long-sleeved shirt with a vest over it, jeans and duck boots. Her golden cross necklace glittered on her neck. Grant whispered, Mrs. Anderson has always been a mom away from home to me. She made our dinner. Brianna got another good look at her. Oh, I know she can cook. Mrs. Anderson had worked for Grant's family since before he could remember and happily moved into the mansion when he purchased it as a getaway spot. She was like a mama to both him and his ranchers, making sure everyone was fed good meals and the place was kept up the way it should be. Mrs. Anderson looked Brianna up and down. Well, aren't you pretty as a picture? Brianna smiled with bashfulness. Thank you, Mrs. Anderson added with a huff. Well, Mr. Calloway needs someone nice. He might be a workaholic and spends all his time with his nose in that computer, but he's a good man. Better than good. He's the best. And he ain't cheap neither. With a red face and a heavy sigh, Grant interrupted. Mrs. Anderson, Brianna is my work colleague. Mrs. Anderson gave a hearty laugh. And so am I, but you're not giving me those googly eyes. She whispered to Brianna, baby, you got him eating out of your hand. Brianna laughed. Grant, in his failed attempt to play it off, could only say, Who's ready to eat? Brianna raised her hand with a giggle. Pancake barked. After you, he said, offering his arm, which she accepted with a flutter of nerves. Walking toward the ranch house, Brianna expected rustic charm, rough-hewn wood, stone fireplaces. Instead, the doors opened to reveal a renovated modern mansion, sleek and light-filled with upscale furnishings, yet still warm with subtle nods to the ranch's history. Inside, a farm-to-table dinner waited. Roasted root vegetables, a perfectly seared chicken, and fresh herbs from the ranch garden, all laid out simply but exquisitely. Brianna couldn't help but glance at Grant, whose green-blue eyes caught hers as he poured them each a glass of wine. Their hands brushed over the glasses. A jolt shot through her. Dinner passed in easy conversation, filled with laughter, playful teasing, and the subtle electricity of proximity. Every time Grant leaned slightly toward her or brushed a stray curl from her face, Brianna's pulse skipped a beat. You never stop working, do you? She asked, taking a sip of wine. She looked at the glass. It was something intense, supple, and velvety. Grant leaned back. I work hard, but I've learned to enjoy the little things, too. Curious, he asked about her. Brianna told him about growing up in New Orleans as the oldest of 5, and how she very rarely had the luxury of asking for help. So she learned how to figure out things on her own. Her mother was now a retired professor of design, and her father was still in construction. They seem different on paper, she said, smiling, but their mutual love for building something out of nothing, that's what kept them strong all these years. Studied her genuine interest in his gaze. Are you biracial? He asked carefully. Brianna nodded. Yes, my mom is black, my grandmother says we're Creole, and my dad is white. His family moved to Louisiana from France way back in the early 1700s. My mom always jokes that Daddy has extra seasoning because he's from New Orleans. Grant chuckled. Seasoning, huh? The sound was warm, filling the quiet spaces between them. Brianna wondered something and decided rather than let her curiosity get the best of her, maybe she should just ask. Have you ever dated a black woman? He set his glass down slowly, smiling with a playful edge. You, her laughter rang out, bright and unrestrained. You are too funny, she said, shaking her head. Okay, your turn, she said with a low voice. Tell me more about you. Leaned back, hands resting lightly on the table. He smiled. Ranch and vineyard upbringing. My parents own quite a few in Temecula, California. I'm an only child. Brianna raised an eyebrow. Only child, huh? Grant smiled. It's just me. Sometimes it was lonely growing up. I always fantasized about having little brothers and sisters, you know. Thank God I made good friends along the way. But Brianna, her stomach fluttered at the mention of her name as he continued. You are super blessed, my friend. You were raised with built-in teammates. Brianna chuckled at the irony. A billionaire saying that Brianna, she was the blessed one. Grant continued. And now life is mainly on the road with construction, investors, government meetings, sometimes exhausting. That's why I love retreats like this ranch and Malibu. Malibu, she asked, eyes wide as she took the last bite of her meal. Beach house, he said casually. I work hard. I relax hard too. The meal ended, dessert cleared, and Grant stood, offering his hand. Want to get some fresh air? Outside, Pancake shot ahead, a golden blur against the twilight sky. They walked close together, arms brushing occasionally, the almost magnetic pull between them undeniable. Grant stopped near the fence, turning to face her. The world seemed to shrink, the ranch, the fatting light, Pancake's playful barks, all fatting into a bubble where only they existed. Their faces were inches apart. Brianna's breath caught. For a moment, everything was suspended. Time, space, the quiet hum of anticipation. He leaned in, her pulse hammering, and she felt the heat of him, the brush of his jacket against hers. Then Pancake barked, chasing a rabbit, breaking the moment. Both of them laughed, breathless, the almost kiss lingering in the air like electricity. Grant's hand brushed hers lightly, deliberately, as they walked back to the house. Heat simmered, unspoken and undeniable. Something had shifted, quietly but profoundly. Hey loves, it's giving falling in love. What do you think? Write a note in the comments and please be sure to subscribe right now. Back to the story. She had left after dessert, promising to check in early the next morning. His words from earlier echoed in her mind. Sometimes it's worth slowing down for the right reasons. She'd let herself imagine, maybe more than she should. Early the next morning, Brianna's phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from the mayor blinked across the screen. How are we looking? I want to announce this at the Christmas Eve market. Brianna stared at the words for a long moment. Good question. How were they looking? She swung her legs out of bed, threw on her black leather jacket and black denim. The sky outside was still pale with early winter light, the town quiet except for the distant hum of delivery trucks and the faint clang of tools from the construction site. If something was wrong with the build, she needed to know now. Besides, Brianna had never been the type to wait for someone else to fix a problem. She had built her entire career on stepping in, rolling up her sleeves, and figuring things out herself. But this morning carried a different kind of pressure. The Live, work units on Market Street were still partially under construction. A few key structural pieces had gone in late the night before, and if they weren't aligned perfectly, the whole facade installation could be delayed. Christmas Eve was only days away. There was no time for delays, no time for mistakes. The site looked eerily still when she arrived. Temporary lights glowed faintly inside the half-finished structure, casting long shadows across stacks of lumber and metal scaffolding. Brianna stepped carefully across the wooden planks, her boots echoing against the unfinished floor. Just a quick look, she murmured to herself. She climbed the narrow staircase toward the upper level where the framing had been installed. The air smelled of sawdust, cold metal, and fresh paint. Up here, the morning wind slipped through the unfinished windows, tugging at her coat. She moved toward the scaffolding, studying the beam alignment with a critical eye. If that joint was off by even half an inch, the plank beneath her shifted. A sharp creak echoed through the structure. Before she could steady herself, a voice ripped through the cold morning air. Brianna, stop. Grant. She turned instinctively toward the sound, her foot slipping on loose debris. The scaffold lurched. For a terrifying split second, the world tilted. Her stomach dropped as the plank beneath her gave way. Grant didn't think. He moved. 1 second he was across the floor, the next he was sprinting, boots pounding against the unfinished boards. Move, he shouted, too late. The metal brace beneath the scaffold snapped with a violent crack. Brianna's balance vanished. The structure tilted sharply toward the open drop below. Several workers near the entrance shouted in alarm. Look out! Grant reached her just as her footing disappeared. His arm shot out, catching her around the waist as she pitched forward. Momentum slammed them both into the railing of the scaffold platform. The unstable structure groaned under the weight, swaying dangerously over the open floor below. Gasps rippled through the small group of construction workers who had just arrived on site. Grant tightened his grip, pulling her hard against his chest. "Don't! Move!" he said, voice low but fierce. Brianna's breath came in short, stunned bursts. The wind whipped through the open beams around them as the scaffold creaked again. Slowly, carefully, Grant shifted his weight, guiding them both toward the safer support beam behind them. Every step felt like it took a lifetime. Finally, his boots hit solid ground. He pulled her down onto the stable floor beside him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Brianna could feel his heart hammering against her ribs where their bodies were still pressed together. One of the workers exhaled loudly. "Man, that was close." Another shook his head. "You just saved her life." Barely seemed to hear them. His hands were still gripping Brianna's arms, his eyes scanning her face like he needed proof she was actually standing there. "You could have fallen," he said hoarsely. What were you thinking?" he demanded, the fear in his voice barely masked by anger. "I needed to check the alignment," she said softly. Grant dragged a hand through his hair, packing once before turning back to her. "You could have been killed." The words hung in the air, and suddenly the reality of what had just happened seemed to crash into him all at once. His voice dropped, raw now. "Do you have any idea what that would have done to me?" Brianna blinked. "Grant!" He stepped closer again, his composure cracking. "I thought I could handle this," he said quietly. "Working with you, keeping things professional, keeping my distance." He laughed once under his breath, shaking his head. "Turns out I was wrong." The workers nearby pretended to busy themselves with equipment, but everyone could hear him now. Grant didn't care. His gaze locked on Brianna's. "Not the kind of man who settles down," he admitted. "My entire life has been about staying mobile, no attachments, no risks." Voice softened. "The second I saw you slip just now, I realized something." Stepped closer until barely inches separated them. "I can't lose you." Brianna's pulse thundered in her ears. "You're impossible to ignore," he continued quietly. "You challenge me, you inspire me, and apparently you scare the hell out of me." She gasped, "Grant." But his hand lifted, brushing a stray curl away from her cheek, interrupting her mid-speech. "I'm done pretending this is just a project," he said. "I like you, Brianna, more than I've liked anyone in a very long time." Brianna's breath trembled as Grant pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her with a strength that felt both protective and desperate. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The construction site was suddenly quiet, too quiet except for the faint creak of metal beams and the distant hum of trucks somewhere down Market Street. Grant's forehead rested lightly against hers. "You scared me," he said softly. His voice had lost its sharp edge. Now it carried something deeper, something vulnerable. Brianna looked up at him, her heart still racing from the fall and from the way he was looking at her. Like she mattered, like she always had. "I'm okay," she whispered. His jaw tightened slightly. "You almost were." The words hung between them. For the first time since she'd known him, Grant Calloway, the calm, polished billionaire who never seemed rattled by anything, looked completely undone. His thumb brushed lightly against her cheek, pushing back one of her curls that the wind had blown loose. "Brianna," he murmured, voice low and rough, "I meant what I said." Her pulse fluttered wildly. "You're impossible to ignore." The tension between them, weeks of teasing, late nights, lingering glances, seemed to tighten like a wire drawn too tight. And then something in his expression shifted. Like a decision had been made. Slowly, deliberately, Grant cupped her face in his hands. "Tell me to stop," he said quietly. She should tell him to stop. They were at work for Pete's sake, but instead, Brianna didn't hesitate. Instead, she moved in closer to him, and that was all the permission he needed. He kissed her, not cautiously, not politely. It was a kiss full of everything he had been holding back. His lips found hers with a sudden warmth that sent a rush of heat through her chest. Brianna's hands instinctively gripped the front of his coat as the kiss deepened, the world around them fading into nothing but the warmth between their bodies. For a man who prided himself on control, Grant kissed like a man who had finally decided to stop pretending. And Brianna felt it. In the way his hands tightened slightly at her waist, in the way his breath caught when she kissed him back, weeks of tension, frustration, and unspoken attraction melted into something electric. One of the construction workers nearby cleared his throat awkwardly. Another muttered with a quiet chuckle. "Well, guess that answers that." Neither of them noticed. Grant finally pulled back just enough to look at her, his forehead still resting against hers, both of them breathing a little faster now. A slow, almost disbelieving smile spread across his face. "Well," he murmured, voice warm again, "that was worth almost losing my mind for." Brianna laughed softly, still a little breathless. "You're impossible." "And yet," he replied, brushing his thumb gently across her cheek again, "you're still here." She looked up at him, eyes shining. She said, "I am." And this time, when he kissed her again, it was slower, softer, but no less certain. Market Street gleamed in holiday splendor. Lights twinkled along the restored brick facades, casting golden reflections across the cobblestone sidewalks. Inside the warm windows, the new shops and lofts glowed with life, wreaths hanging proudly, while the scent of cinnamon and roasted chestnuts drifted through the crisp winter air. The town had turned out in full force. Families bundled in scarves and wool coats filled the square, children pointing excitedly at the decorations, while holiday music floated through the evening air. At the center of it all stood the mayor, practically glowing with pride as she stepped up to the microphone. Behind her, Brianna and Grant stood side by side in front of the bright red ribbon stretched across the entrance to the new Market Street complex. Maeve stood nearby with her arms crossed, pretending not to be emotional, while Tae Kim finished a soulful holiday song that earned a wave of applause from the crowd. "Hey loves, do you know who Tae Kim is? If not, watch our very first video. I babysat a K-pop idol for Christmas and it got complicated." It's the sweet story of how Maeve, the mayor's assistant, fell in love with Tae Kim, a former K-pop star. But today's story is about Brianna and Grant, so let's get back to it. The mayor cleared her throat and leaned into the microphone. "Well," she began, smiling warmly at the gathered crowd, "a few weeks ago this street looked like a construction zone, and a prayer rippled through the audience. Thanks to two people standing behind me, Petersburg now has something truly special." She gestured toward Brianna and Grant. "A place where people can live, work, shop, and build their dreams. And what makes it even better is now we're eligible for the multi-million-dollar revitalization grant." The crowd applauded again. Then the mayor paused, glancing knowingly between them. "And I should probably add," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "that if Mr. Calloway hadn't literally caught Miss Petco from falling off scaffolding earlier this week, we might not be standing here tonight." A wave of surprised murmurs moved through the crowd. Grant looked slightly embarrassed. Brianna's cheeks warmed. The mayor grinned. "Not only did Mr. Calloway help her to save Market Street," she continued, raising an eyebrow, "it seems he saved Miss Petco while at it." The crowd clapped again. Maeve, who was on Brianna's left, leaned whispered just loud enough for her to hear. "Honestly," Maeve said with an eyebrow raised. "Seemed like he captured your heart too. I heard about that kiss." Brianna laughed. "Word gets around," Maeve answered. "No, you mean Janice gets around. She's great at her job." They both laughed. The mayor, unbeknownst of the giggling behind her, raised the ceremonial scissors. "All right, folks," she said brightly. "Let's make this official." Who was on Brianna's right side, slipped his hand naturally into hers. Together, they cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted into cheers, but for Brianna, it was as if the square had shrunk to just the two of them because, to her surprise, he held her by the waist and kissed her in front of the clapping crowd. She could feel the heat of his body, the strength in his arms, the softness of his lips against hers. The mayor shot a look in Janice's direction, who just hunched her shoulders while taking as many photographs as humanly possible. The kiss lingered between Brianna and Grant, a promise, a spark, a confession made without words. The love that had grown quietly over weeks of planning, problem-solving, and stolen moments was finally visible for everyone to see. And as they pulled back, foreheads resting together, Brianna realized with a fluttering heart that nothing could dim this, neither deadlines, nor frost, nor the challenges of a small city. Market Street was theirs now, restored, glowing, alive with hope and celebration. And in the middle of it all, hand in hand with Grant, Brianna felt like her own heart had been restored too. "Hey loves, we love a beautiful kiss, don't we? Can you do us a favor and write a comment? What do you think about this budding love? Please subscribe and like right now. It just takes a few seconds to do so. We want you to hear all of the good love stories that will be dropping." Now back to Brianna and Grant. 6 months later, Petersburg's Market Street hummed with life. Shops were busy, lofts vibrant, and the town had fallen in love with the work Brianna and Grant had poured into it. Yet even with all the celebrations, there were moments for just the two of them. Weekend mornings at the ranch, golden fields stretching as far as the eye could see, pancake racing ahead like a streak of sunlight. One late afternoon, Grant led Brianna up a winding path that overlooked the rolling ranch. The air was crisp and carried the scent of pine and fresh earth, with Pancake prancing ahead before pausing to look back and ensure her humans followed. Grant stopped at the crest of the hill, gazing at her with a mixture of warmth and intensity. Today he wasn't dressed in his ranch gear. No, today he wore a black overcoat and, despite the winter chill, a slightly unbuttoned black silk shirt which gave a peek of his muscularity. He looked incredible. Of course, he did. He always did. Brianna thought to herself that he looked particularly sexy on this day. She had never been to this part of the ranch. It was breathtakingly beautiful. She looked up wondering why string lights were hanging from a few of the trees. It was as if a celebration had been planned. That's exactly when Grant kneeled on the cold ground. "Brianna Petco," he said, voice low and steady. "You've captured my heart from the very beginning. Every blueprint, every late night, every laugh, you've changed my life. I don't want to spend another day without you. Will you marry me?" At first, her hands flew to her face in shock, but soon tears, laughter, disbelief, and joy followed, all swirled together. "Yes, yes, Grant, of course, yes." He slipped the shining, perfectly fitted, naturally rare pink six-prong solitaire ring onto her finger, and the world seemed to exhale. Grant laughed. Pancake barked excitedly, spinning in happy circles as if announcing to everyone, "She said yes." Brianna said with amusement, looking at her ring finger, "Ooh, pink." Grant smiled with a knowing look. "You know I like pink on you." He pulled her into his arms. The warmth of his embrace, the beat of his heart against hers, the glow of the sunset over the ranch, it all felt like the beginning of forever. "I love you," he whispered into her ear. "I love you," she whispered back, standing on her tiptoes to kiss his soft lips. Their Christmas week wedding at the ranch was a vision of rustic elegance. It celebrated her Louisianan roots, his SoCal upbringing, and the holiday spirit. Pancake was best dog, red and green ribbons tied to her collar, prancing between guests. Brianna's sisters and brothers were brides and groomsmen, along with Grant's best friends from school. Grant's parents cheered from the front row, sitting beside Mrs. Anderson, who was whistling with her fingers. Clapping proudly next to them were Brianna's mother and father. Both the mayor's and Janice's Cheshire cat grins lit up the ceremony, and Maeve and Tay whistled while holding hands, thinking of their own Christmas wedding day the year before. Brianna walked down the aisle, heart pounding with a gown as gorgeous as she was. Grant's breath stopped when he saw her, eyes shining with love. They met at the altar, hands entwined, and when they kissed fully, deeply, and without hesitation, it was a kiss that promised everything. They spent their Christmas honeymoon at the Malibu house, letting the rhythm of the ocean slow everything down. They could have traveled anywhere in the world. Grant certainly had the means. France for the vineyards, Santorini, Tokyo, Cape Town. But neither of them wanted that. For now, they just wanted quiet. Just the two of them, time to learn each other, to laugh, to explore the life they were building together. One afternoon, they lay side by side on the warm sand, the Pacific stretching endlessly before them. The sun dipped slowly toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and coral. Brianna rested her head against Grant's shoulder and let her mind wander. She thought of the ranch, of Market Street glowing with holiday lights, of the little city of Petersburg and the people who had become family. She even smiled thinking about Pancake's joyful barks, currently being very spoiled by Maeve and Tay while they pup-sat back home. All of it, every challenge, every late night, every moment of doubt. It had become the backdrop to a story that had started with a blueprint, a spark, and a shared dream. Grant's fingers laced through hers. And for the first time in a long time, Brianna felt something settle deep in her heart. Peace. She thanked the Lord for it. She didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. She had a partner now. Someone who challenged her, protected her, and loved her completely. She squeezed his hand and looked out at the endless ocean. This was love. And this time it was forever. This has been Christmas in Old Town, where ambitious women, unexpected love, and the holiday spirit collide. Thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us. Please subscribe, comment, and share. Hit the notification bell so you'll know right away when there's a new love story. More romances are coming. Be sure to check Maeve's and Tae Kim's love story. It's sure to make you swoon. All of the romances are set right here in Petersburg. The more people subscribe, the more love stories that we can tell. Be blessed and have a very merry everything.